Hello, thank you for joining us today on this AXELOS webinar. My name is Amrit Saroya and I'm a marketing lead at AXELOS, focusing on the AXELOS membership program. I'll tell you a little bit more about our membership program at the end of the webinar. But before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping so everybody understands the way that the webinar is going to be delivered, information about Q&A, etc. So we are recording this session, so if you want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues, you will be able to do so. Tomorrow we'll be sending an email that will have a link to the recording as well as additional assets that we've provided as part of the webinar. There is a Twitter feed and a feedback survey which you should see on your screen. We always love to hear feedback from our participants, so if you want to tweet us during the webinar, please do so, and you can use the hashtag AXELOSwebinars. But we'd also like you to fill in the feedback survey because this helps us to understand what we did well, what we didn't do so well, and what you might want to see in the future, so do give us that feedback. And just so you all know, you are on mute, so I can't hear you. Hopefully you can all hear me. If you have any questions, please just put them through on the chat box, which you should see on the left-hand side of your screen. My colleague Emma is with me today. She's actually running the technical side of things on the webinar. So if you have any technical issues, Emma will respond to your queries ASAP to make sure that you get up and running. But any questions that you have around the content, what we're going to do is we're going to save them for the end and we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. So we'll hopefully try and get as many of your questions answered during that time. So today's webinar is about project management in practice. Can you be strategic and agile? It's going to last for about 40 minutes and then we're going to try and hold a 20-minute Q&A. So again, please do send in your questions. At this point, I'd like to introduce our two panelists who are going to be discussing this subject in more detail, Duncan Wade and David Hinde. Now, before we go into the topic, I'm going to ask Duncan and David to just give a brief introduction to who they are, their kind of experiences in project management and their backgrounds and everything else. So I'm going to hand over to you to Duncan first.
Okay. Hello, folks. My name's Duncan Wade. I'm a director of the Human Interface Consultancy, and we really specialize in project delivery, amongst other things. That really means we specialize in people, because projects are all about people. So we've got a really keen focus on coaching and mentoring, and with an intention to get the very best from people. But we're also equally interested in processes and working practices. But processes and working practices that actually help your people do things well. So stuff that we can use rather than simply the theory of it. I have to say right now, I'll nail my colours to the mast. I'm a big fan of Prince 2 and Agile working like Scrum. I think there's a place for both, and I think both of them are very pertinent. So that's me.
Okay, thank you. And David?
Thanks, Eric. My name's David. Hello, everyone. So I've been involved in project management and program management for the last 20 years or so. My initial industry that I worked in was software engineering, but more recently I've moved into working in a whole range of different environments. I work for companies like the BBC, for Deloitte, also for the UK government, delivering large change programs. And over the last 10 years I've run a consultancy company called Orgtopia, and we do a number of things, working with organizations to help them project ashore their initiatives and develop their competencies within project and program management. We also do training courses, and I work closely with a company called Learning Tree, where we deliver a range of different project courses, including Prince 2 and Agile and Scrum. And I also write as well, and I've written a couple of books on project management, the Prince 2 study guide, and also the Project Manager and the Pyramid. So that's probably enough from me.
Great, thank you very much. And just in terms of those publications, we've got them coming up on the screen now, so you should be able to see those if you're interested in reading more about those. Now, just to give everyone a bit of background as to the reason behind today's webinar and the subject that we're talking about. Earlier this year, towards the back end of January, we actually launched some research that AXELOS had conducted called the Future Project Management Professional. And it was a research activity that we conducted to look at what future trends might impact on the future of the project management profession, and actually what those trends meant for individuals in terms of their skills and their capabilities, and how they could stay successful in the future. And the report, which is available as one of the assets within the webinar, and we will be emailing it to you at the end of the webinar. The report had a range of different findings, but two of the key things that stood out was the idea that one was about project managers needing to have a more strategic focus, and the fact that they needed to get more involved with the strategic direction of the organization and feed into the strategic direction. And then the other thing was about there being an increase in Agile adoption. So the fact that a lot of organizations are using Agile now, a lot of project managers are using Agile, but actually in the future there's going to be a greater need for it. And so, if you think about those two concepts, strategy and Agile, is it even possible? Can you be strategic and can you be Agile? So I'm looking to you first, David.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I mean, when you first said that to me, I was thinking that the words Agile and strategic sound quite different. They sound quite contradictory. Strategy seems to me setting a broad direction over a long period of time, whereas agility sounds like you might be adapting and changing your direction quite a lot over a shorter period of time. But when I thought about it more closely, I realized I don't think they are polar opposites. I think I was thinking about some quotes from leaders of various organizations. I read a quote by Meg Whitman, who's the current president of HP. And when she led eBay, she was talking about forgetting 5-year plans. We only plan a few days in advance in this organization. But even though they say these sort of things, I think organizations do have a broad direction in terms of strategy, which maybe not focusing them on a particular point, but maybe thinking about the sort of values and broad purpose that they want their organization to bring. So, for example, Apple, when Steve Jobs was at Apple, he was talking about creating a dent in the universe, trying to create some innovative, disruptive type products. And 3M, the inventors of the Post-its, are known for their broad value of innovation. They always have these strategic goals, those two organizations, but in order to attain them, I think they need to be very agile, because environments are changing rapidly. They're still trying to create a dent in the universe, but how they do it might adapt with new products like the iPad, the iPhone, and so forth, and they need to be able to respond to those as quickly as possible. So I don't think they are polar opposites. I think we need both.
Duncan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I very definitely agree with David, but I also think that perhaps what we're looking at is the two faces of project management. In one sense, where the project manager sits in the organization, somewhere in the middle, when we look up, what we're hoping to see is strategy. What we're hoping to get is some guidance as to what we're trying to achieve and why we're trying to achieve it, and hopefully to have some influence in terms of what that strategy may be and what the aims of the organization might be trying to pull off. But when we look down, what we're looking at is delivery. And within the delivery space, Agile is probably the hot topic. It's one of the ones that people are talking about most at the moment. But really what it is a delivery mechanism. And an ideal, a healthy organization is one that can create strategy that gets implemented. So this idea that both of those things are in play and both of them are interested to project management, I think is really important.
Okay. And so a lot of project managers would agree that they need to have a strategic remit, and would say that they already do have a strategic remit. But do you think that this kind of remit could be broadened? Do you think there is scope for having more of a strategic input?
I definitely think there is, yeah, because I think there's a gap between the ideal and the practice. What we've just described, I think, is what we would probably hope was happening. But I actually think that what happens in reality is rather less than that. I think what we find actually is project managers that have got a very solid focus on trying to get stuff done. And that fills their day. That's their whole day. We're just trying to get stuff done. We're trying to be successful. We're trying to deliver products. And really, we have very little time for anything else. And I think, to a certain extent, large organizations can equally be guilty that the level of organization, the level of management that's actually involved in defining strategy isn't that interested in engaging with project management. It's actually quite happy to tell us what strategy is, but whether that's a discussion and a dialogue, I would challenge in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think from my experience, there is often a disconnect between strategy, those that set strategy and those that manage projects. I mean, I'm a big advocate of Prince 2. And for those that know Prince 2 or those that don't, the very early points of Prince 2 is often about trying to work out how a project would align with strategy, writing a business case for the project, thinking about what sort of value that particular project would bring to an organization and whether or not to do it or not. And when I teach people Prince 2, we often find that the people in my course who are called project managers don't actually get involved in those steps. Someone else will do that. Someone else will write the business case for the project. And then once that's written, the implementation of that particular project would be handed over to someone else. And that someone else, the project manager, would be very much focused on the products. And that handover sometimes creates a disconnect. There's not the sort of communication flow between the feasibility and business case for the project and the products that are being created by the project.
So, kind of following on from that point, the idea that within Prince 2, the guidance, the methodology does actually look at the strategic input. It does look at, you say, at the business case, the executive. So you could argue that this should be happening already because it's there within the methodology.
You could argue that, yeah. Is that all right, Duncan? Yeah. The problem, I think, sometimes is well, probably just what we've said, actually, is that the person who's focused on strategy in the Prince 2 method is a role called the executive. And when we talk about project managers, a person called a project manager having a more strategic understanding, in the Prince 2 method, that role isn't really within their particular job role. It's more in the executive job role. And I think that's one of the reasons sometimes it fails in practice, the PM having an understanding of strategy.
Yeah, I think the key here is that there's a number of roles involved, and there's a number of layers of the organisation that have to collaborate and communicate. Prince 2 actually lays out a very good model. It describes a project board whose role is to be the interface, the communicator with the broader organisation. It's there to ensure that the project itself is delivering against the strategic aims of the organisation. It's there to communicate back to senior management anything that's happening within the project that is important for them to understand in terms of that strategy and how they're going to implement things. But again, what we're describing is the theory, and the challenge is the practice. And what we've got is a number of people that need to be able to engage in their role properly in order to be able to create that chain. There's quite a long chain between the very senior managers of an organisation who are truly working in a strategic manner, down to those that actually are engaged as a project board within a project, down to those that are doing project management, down to those who are on the coalface doing real work. And we've got to hold hands. We've got to make the daisy chain. And if we don't make the daisy chain, then actually things become much harder to actually tie together.
Yeah.
So what would you define as being the benefits of project managers becoming more involved at the strategic level?
I think it's almost more than benefit, actually. I think it's essential. We need the delivery mechanism to link up with the business and be able to achieve the aims of the business. It's actually part and parcel, and I think it's a very great risk to many organisations where what's happening down at the delivery level is only an approximation of what senior management would actually consider to be important. And that, again, back to the same thing, back to that communication. And these days, I think it has to go both ways. When we start to look at the rate of change that the world we live in is suffering, actually, it's often the people that are down at the coalface that are most clearly seeing that rate of change. And if they have no mechanism to communicate that back up the path, then again, our strategies start to suffer. So it's a two-way communication that really actually is essential for success.
And what do you think are the challenges then in terms of the not being able to communicate up the chain?
I think there's many. I think some organisations manage it very well. I think it's really important to put it in context. I don't think this is a failure of all organisations by any means. What we tend to emphasise in something like this is we tend to see the outliers. And I think the outliers are things like not actually having a clear strategy articulated in the first place. We haven't actually managed to articulate what the business is about. Therefore, delivery is doing the best it can, and broadly speaking, it's making it up as it goes along. There's a lack of communication, but there's also that rate of change where strategies become old-fashioned. They become inappropriate very quickly. Now, one of the beauties of delivery, if we're doing delivery well, is a whole mechanism of experimentation and learning. And that experimentation and learning can inform effective strategy. But all of it is dependent on the communication that we need to put in place.
David?
Yeah, I mean, I would back up with that, what you're saying. I think the problem is that we've got some people in organisations focused on strategy, as we've said. Some people focus on project management. And they find it difficult to see the world from each other's perspective. If we take the people interested in strategy and seeing it from the PM's perspective, I think unfortunately, over the years, we've got this culture where people at the top of organisations don't seem to have as good a grip on what it takes to manage projects, to deliver strategy. There was quite an interesting article I was reading a few weeks ago in the Harvard Business Review. A chap called Antonio Rodriguez challenged HBR, Harvard Business Review, to find out, to show him articles on project management. Now, HBR is the sort of magazine, of course, that people on project boards or senior level within an organisation would be reading. And Harvard Business Review really struggled to find more than a handful of project management articles over the last 10 years within their publication. Also, he went around some of the world's providers of MBAs. Once again, the sort of course a senior level executive will be going on, senior level executive who's focused on strategy. And many of those MBAs also had only maybe a superficial mention of project management. So what we seem to have got ourselves into over the years is a lot of people at the top of organisations very focused on strategy, but without an understanding of what it takes to manage the projects to deliver that strategy. And I think that's another reason we seem to have this break between strategy and project managers.
No, that does make sense. So thinking about it from, again, the project manager's perspective, how can they get more strategic exposure and then be in a position to influence?
Yeah, we can't just blame the people at the top not having an understanding of the project managers. It's the other way around as well, isn't it? So if you're a project manager, you also need to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the strategy creators. And I think that's a very good question. It's difficult, I think, to learn how to create a brilliant strategy for your organisation. Particularly in the way that something like Prince 2 teaches us project management. There isn't a sort of step-by-step guide of how to create the best strategy in the world so your organisation beats all the competition. It just doesn't exist. So how do you get a better understanding of strategy as a project manager? Well, I suppose there's some fundamentals. You could learn some models like, basic models like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Michael Porter has written a fantastic book on 5 competitive forces that look at the creation of strategies in organisations. You know, you can read around the subject looking at business papers, the FT, Economist and so forth. And that gives you an understanding of the theory maybe. But I think you also need this connection between managers and senior managers. I mean, I was working for a company recently where we were looking at project management assurance. And what they'd done is create a working group of the senior directors who had to meet up with people at the project management sort of level. And every year, 10 people at the sort of project management level created a working group, came to that with board of directors as well, with some ideas about how to improve the company. The board of directors fed back what ideas would work strategically, what wouldn't. And it actually started to create a much stronger link across the sort of hierarchy of the organisation. So I think things like that can help as well to get a better idea.
Yeah, and I really support that. I mean, I think my answer to this would always be the idea of coaching and mentoring. The idea that senior management within the business actually engages one-to-one or with small groups, as David was suggesting, with the level of management that does project managers. And this idea that senior management really want to understand what their project managers are doing, what drives their project managers, what are the targets that their project managers are given, how would their project managers see their world. And at the same time, I don't think there's any better way of actually starting to learn and understand strategy from talking to the people who live it day in and day out. And when project managers have an opportunity to spend time with that level of management, or people with that sort of role, then actually what we do is we all start to learn. We learn from each other. And it's that idea that a business wants to invest in a communication path that goes across the levels of the organization and start to actually put together some programs or some practices, which means that these groups talk to each other outside of formal meetings, talk to each other in an opportunity to actually share their perspectives of what matters.
Yeah. So when we were doing the research and we were speaking to project managers to get their views, one of the implications that came out of those conversations was that actually project management was beginning to merge with program management. So you talk about, the talk around strategy and the strategic vision. A lot of the things that project managers were talking about were the elements that you might see in some of the more in MSP and program management. Do you think there is a blurring of the lines now between kind of project management, program management, and then, portfolio management even?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I again put it in context. I think there are some large organizations that have very well established project management methods being supported by program management offices, being supported by portfolios. But we're really talking about very big organizations when we actually have that in place and it's working well. Even large organizations sometimes don't have a program management level to coordinate these things. But it gets more complicated, it gets more muddy than that, because traditionally project managers were interested in output, program managers were interested in outcome. Then Agile turned everything on its head, because Agile won't behave and sit in the boxes very nicely. Because Agile delivery is all about the idea of whatever we can learn together with our customers, which will deliver the outcomes we need. So it crosses those boundaries. It crosses the traditional boundaries that we'd like to draw on the board.
And this was one of the things that did come out of the research. The research calls for the fact that project managers need to actually broaden their scope to focus on the outcomes. So have the benefits been realised rather than the outputs or the product, so to speak. So
I think, just to back up, it's a slightly academic conversation sometimes. What is a project? What is a program? And we talk about it in my clients, program, big thing, projects, a smaller thing. But, certainly when you look at syllabuses like the Prince 2 syllabus, and you mentioned managing successful programs, often the part of project management where you say, okay, people are starting to use the products now and getting value for the organization. In Prince 2, that's left after the model. So Prince 2 is delivering the products, and then probably post-project, the products are going to be used to gain value for the organization. Now, Prince 2 does, I'm being slightly flippant here, because Prince 2 does talk about things like benefit realization plans, planning to get someone to measure the benefits and so forth. So, but it's definitely a sort of part of what we need to do, which isn't part of Prince 2. Whereas program management is often seen, or part of program management is often seen as not only delivering the products, but also thinking about how the products will be used to realize those benefits. So I think there is a bit of a blurring of the lines. And if we start, because we'll talk about Agile in a minute, one of the things I worry about this structure of portfolio management down to program management, down to project management, is it's all starting to feel a bit heavy-weighted and three-leveled. And it's all feeling a little bit rigid and maybe not so agile anymore. some of the organisations I work with are quite small in themselves, some sort of venture capital funded sort of .com type startups, and they just haven't got the capacity to fill up a portfolio board, a program board, and a project board. Yeah, I think there is. I think you're right. There is a blurring of the line.
Yeah, and I think part of what we're saying here is actually it's actually quite an important realisation. I think if we get away from the labels, what the research was showing, and I think what the history has shown as well, is that we have to start to be interested in both output products, but also outcomes. And where that sits in which particular model is probably less important than a realization within the organization that outputs, and using a Prince term, that aren't fit for purpose aren't very useful. Yeah? And what we need is outputs that can bring about the outcomes that we need to bring about the strategic direction we're trying to achieve and the benefits that the business is organizing, is looking for. So it's really important that we start to address all of these things and recognize that whether we see it in perhaps a traditional model where projects do outputs, programs do outcomes, or a more agile model where agile is very, very clearly focused on the idea that what we need to be able to do is to deliver product that delivers the outcome that's wanted in the first place. So it's better focused in some regards than perhaps some of the traditional models. But what we're seeing is a realization that we all share. Actually, it's important.
Right. Well, as you said, David, we talk about agile, but that is the second part of this webinar. So can you be strategic and agile?
Yeah.
What I would like to do, though, at this point, is actually invite our audience to complete a quick poll. So on your screen now, you should see a poll question about are you using agile principles in your organisation? So it's going to give you all a few minutes to complete that, and I'll just give you a little bit of context as to this question. So agile for me is a term that is used quite freely, and I often hear people, friends, when talking about it, saying that they're adopting an agile approach. But Duncan, if I said that to you, what would that mean to you?
Nothing. I liked your phrase that agile is used quite freely. I thought that was a really nice way of putting it, because I think the problem is that agile as a word is really made up. It's for those that are engaged in this movement, it has certain meanings, and they would expect somebody that was claiming to be agile to have certain behaviours, to carry out certain actions. But for many of us, actually, agile is simply a word that's a synonym of nimble. And what you'll see is organisations treating it, depending upon whether they have knowledge of the detail or not, one way or another. So the truth of the matter is, if somebody says, I'm agile, they haven't really told you much. You're going to have to ask more questions to find out whether that is simply saying, we as an organisation think we should be flexible, which is nice and sensible, or whether it actually means that they're starting to adopt frameworks and behaviours which we would recognise professionally as effective in the context of delivering agility.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, if I told you I was Prince 2, it's a bit easier to define that because there's a book and I can have a look at what Prince 2 is all about and look at what you're doing. But if I tell you that I'm Agile, there isn't one defined version of Agile. There are quite a number of them out there, like Scrum and the Prince 2 Agile, DSDM, and so forth. And then some people aren't even thinking about a particular method like that. They're just saying, well, as you say, we're nimble and flexible and quicker and so forth. And I think there's a lot of fallacies around this agile. I've talked to people about they've just become agile, they tell me, and because of that, they're going to be able to deliver their projects in half the time. But just using the word hasn't, speeded things up really. I mean, for me, I think it's a sort of set of values that we have when we deliver projects, which we're valuing collaborating with people, we're valuing end products rather than lots of documentation, we're valuing an ability to be adaptable and so forth. And many of the things like Scrum and DSDM and things share those values, but it's a difficult thing to test. It's a bit of a subjective thing to test.
Well, we've just kind of, as a quick poll to the audience, asked them, are you using agile principles in your organisation? And 61% have come back to say that they are, and 38% say no. So I'm just going to move on to the next poll, just to try and understand a little bit more about the types of agile approach that you're using. And we've just got a selection on the screen here for you. So Prince to Agile, Scrum, XP, Lean, Kanban, just to try and gauge our audience's awareness and usage of different approaches. But going back to my kind of comment that I made before about, saying that, we're being agile, it was actually, I was speaking to a friend of mine who said this to me. They're like, oh yeah, we're starting to use agile approaches a lot more in our organisation. And after asking her what that actually meant, it turned out that she meant that actually they'd implemented a hot desking policy.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, that's what you think is agile. So what she was talking about was agile behaviours within the workplace, rather than agile approaches, which is what I was expecting to hear. So, there is this kind of, as you say, confusion between the behaviours versus the actual processes or the outputs of what agile, the outputs are going to be. So, in terms of...
I think you're articulating it well. It's exactly the challenge we face. And when we start to try and understand what does agility mean, the behaviours are often the common starting point. But the behaviours, to be fair, are very broad. I mean, they talk about things like collaboration, they talk about self-organising, working iteratively, gaining feedback from those iterations and learning. They strongly emphasise an idea of a customer focus and empowered teams. Now, these are, I think, behaviours that almost anybody working in a delivery environment would buy into. We'd all look at that and go, yep, I'm really comfortable with that. It doesn't matter whether I'm a Prince 2 professional or I'm a Scrum team member. We will all look at those and say those are good things. But it's when you go the next level down and you start to look at the detail of the working practice and in an agile context, the frameworks that are being applied, when it starts to come to life, when you start to really understand what people are doing differently to what they've done before. And that's where we start to see the real clarity of it. So it is one of those conversations that's layered. The very first layer gets us started. We're in the right ballpark, but we don't learn very much from it until we ask a few more questions.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. It's, unfortunately, it's one of those words that's come into parlance, isn't it? Particularly over the last sort of 10 years. And people have sort of swallowed it up and almost get indigestion on it, because they want to be seen as agile in some sort of way, a bit like the web was in the 1990s. And everything has to be seen from some sort of agile slant. But I mean, for me, it's trying to be a bit more definitive about what agile is. And I think, practices like Scrum, practices like Prince 2 Agile are giving us a way of doing that, giving us a way of looking at an environment, testing it against a certain set of ideas and rules and values, and then we can work out how agile or how not agile we actually are.
Well, we've got the results back from the audience poll, so just kind of for your interest. So the most popular approach is Scrum.
Yeah.
Kanban is listed in there, and then Prince 2 Agile and Lean. And it is. I'm going to bring this up because I know that this was a conversation that you two had offline about, is Kanban considered to be agile, isn't it? But even amongst our audience, a lot of them identify with it as being an agile approach.
I was in an office last week, a finance department, and they had their Kanban boards up with sticky notes on the side, and they were telling me that they were agile. And does it help them collaborate better? Yes, it does. Does it avoid comprehensive documentation? Yes, it does. So, testing it against some of the values, you might, make an argument that they are being more agile. Duncan is not looking at me.
No. I think we were in one of those situations where we were vehemently agreeing, because I definitely see Kanban as agile. I see it as one of the big leaders. I think most times when you see people actually implementing frameworks for real, they're doing some variation of Scrum. Scrum is, I think, the very, very strong leader in an agile market. But I think Kanban's coming up well. It's got a good following, and it's a slightly different vision. If Scrum sees the world as iterative boxes, Kanban sees the work as efficient flow, and both of those lead us to good agile practices. So, but it's interesting to see the split there as far as our audience is concerned, to see that these things are recognised, these things are known.
we can go down agile holes. We can start discussing where Kanban is a method in itself or a tool within Scrum. And I mean, I've been on forums that we spent several weeks discussing just one of those points. And actually, the irony is, of course, when you discuss those points in such pedantic ways, you're not being agile at all. Yeah.
Well, if we kind of go on to looking at kind of agile in the future, so the fact that the research has called for the fact that, in the future within project management there's going to be a greater need for agile, what do you think that's going to look like?
I absolutely agree. Growth, more everywhere. We're going to see more and more agile approaches, agile frameworks applied. At the moment it's a bit trapped in IT. When you look at something like Scrum, I think mostly what you're looking at is applications for software development. But I think that's already changing. It's going to change more. There's no reason why it should be trapped in IT. It's not specific to IT, really. It's a way of working that is appropriate to all sorts of different disciplines within an organization. And I think what we're starting to see here is something that starts to set up a future where when you look at Prince 2 professionals, you'll see Prince 2 professionals that are very happy working with a waterfall delivery mechanism, and you will also see Prince 2 professionals which are very happy working with an agile delivery mechanism. We'll just simply see that actually what we need to make use of here is the tools we have available. It's the right tool for the job.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things happening at the moment that are quite interesting within my world. I mean, Prince 2, for example, is going through a revision. One of the key things for Prince 2 2017 is to specifically say about how Prince 2 works in an agile environment. And they've got that at the end of each chapter, so I think that's going to help us as a Prince 2 practitioner. The one thing I would say, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, I think there are certain situations that don't suit agile. Certain situations that are a bit more maybe predictable. If you're constructing some sort of a support system for a rocket or something, how the rocket will work today was probably the same as it will work in 10 years' time. So there are certain more predictable types of projects that I think don't suit Agile so much. And one of the problems I think with Agile is its difficulty in scaling. And if you look at Scrum, for example, they've been looking at this problem for a few years and come up with some ideas of how you make it bigger and bigger. But it's a sort of paradox, really, because the bigger you get, the less agile you are. So the agile, I like the values, but there are some situations where you have to recognise that you need to be a sort of more waterfall type thing. I think be more predictable and maybe lay a point in the sand where you're going to get to in 2 years' time, and that's it.
I think the future is a mixed delivery. I don't think there's a right way and a wrong way. I think you can be in some situations where the entire project is probably best driven under a waterfall, very clear outputs, very clear, definitive delivery. But then even within that environment, you'll find some areas where experimentation, research, learning will be really powerful. But you'll find other projects which are quite different, where actually the whole thing suits an agile delivery mechanism extremely well.
Yeah.
And it's that mixture. I think as professionals, we're going to have to get used to the idea that we're dealing with both. We could be facing either or some mixture of the two.
Yeah.
So then what advice would you have for project managers that are looking to start or increase their adoption of Agile?
Well, I think the first step is, for example, Scrum. It was interesting, that poll, that Scrum was the most widely adopted one. And I think one of the good reasons for that is Scrum is actually quite easy to learn, theoretically. Ken Schwaber, one of the advocates of Scrum, one of the guys that set it up, said you can learn Scrum in 5 minutes, really. But the tricky thing is to get it to work in practice. A very first step will be to learn some of the rules. And then you need to have a go at it and adopt it within an organization. But that can be challenging because senior management, the ideal of being agile down below and lack of control down below is a bit of a scary thought. So you need to progressively add it into your environment in a way that can work for both the coalface and also at senior management level.
Yeah, and I think that puts it quite nicely. As an individual, I think you need to learn, and I think we can assume that there's nothing in there that we need to know, and that's a big mistake. There's a lot to learn about the way that Agile has repurpose things we already know about, retargeted, rethought ideas that have been around for a long time. So I think there's an individual learning exercise. But I think also in terms of the idea of adopting it within the business, there's three key elements. We need to be able to build teams that are truly self-managing, and that takes time. We need to be able to get management that can interface with a self-management team in an intelligent way and work well together. And we need sponsorship. Senior management needs to understand that Agile is in their own interests, there's benefits there, and they need to support those spirits. And we need to engage the customer element within the business as well, because the whole point about Agile is teams working directly with the customer to deliver business value. And so we need to start to make people realize that Agile isn't something that a little group in IT does. It's something that we all do. And if we don't all do it, then we lose something from it.
Okay, so kind of bringing us back to like the overarching subject of the webinar, can you be agile and can you be strategic? Can you be strategic and agile? How does agile align with strategy? And you know, thinking of the comment that you said, David, around the fact that actually there is a reluctance from senior management to adopt agile. So how can you make the two line up?
Yeah. If I may have a stab first, I mean, I think it's going right back to the beginning, which started to talk about this idea of how do we communicate, how do we build channels of communication. If we're doing the right things, then Agile, I think, helps us formulate strategy. Its ability to test, to experiment, to discover quickly is actually vital for organisation strategy in this sort of day and age. When change is hitting us so fast, we need to be able to understand that change, apply it, adopt it, live with it, fight it, make whatever decision we need to do, but we need to have evidence and data. Yeah. So I think when it's working well, it's an absolutely brilliant combination. I do also think that sometimes when Agile gets out of the box, it can be uncontrolled, and that's when we see when Agile is poorly applied, it starts to fragment things, it starts to charges off in a million different directions which are not being centrally managed or centrally understood. And then we can see the dark side of it, where actually we start to lose benefit from that lack of clarity.
I think, you know, if an organisation, if the people setting the strategy are going to open themselves up to a more agile way of working, they need to let go to some extent of the control, because if they set a very constrained strategy over the next 12 months or so, and then the people on the ground floor are being agile and seeing that certain changes need to be put into place for the scope of their project, that can be quite uncomfortable for someone at the top. You know, they've set the direction, and when they look down below, they're seeing other things being created, simply for the fact that the customers see more value in that than the direction that's been set by senior management. So, you know, I think one of the key aspects we talked about before is Agile is about collaboration, and it's very important to create a communication collaboration between those setting strategy and those at the bottom doing the projects. And they need to work very, very closely together in a way that in some organisations we don't see. We see the senior people on the top floor in some sort of lovely office, and the people doing the projects are on the bottom floor, and never the twain shall meet. Well, that's probably not going to work if we're going to align strategy and Agile together. They need to work much more closely than that. But it's a challenge. It's a definite big challenge, I think.
So what I'm actually going to do now is we've had some questions come in from the audience, so I think now would be a nice time to kind of bring some of those in. So I'm going to go with the first one, which does actually follow on from what we've been talking about. So can Agile be called a strategy itself, or is it just a delivery mechanism for the organisation strategy?
I think it can be called strategy in itself. I mean, I think, you know, let's take the Apple example. You know, Apple under Steve Jobs was a very agile organisation, moving from, you know, PCs to the iPods, to the iPads, to the iPhones. I mean, one of the strategies there was to constantly adapt, to be nimble within the marketplace, and to create new marketplaces, and or even if they don't create them, to shoehorn on one that exists very, very quickly. So I think you're right. I think maybe strategy can have an element of agility to it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, but I don't think that's how most people use it. That would be where my argument comes. I think Agile is typically used to be a description of a set of behaviors, a set of techniques, all which are broadly associated with the delivery of something. And if we then use those techniques in the context of something like strategy, I think it's equally appropriate. I mean, they're good techniques to use. But when we look at the frameworks that are successful at the moment, they're all about the delivery of a product. Now, maybe that product's the strategy. That's what they're about.
Well, then actually on that, the next question that we've had through is, does the actual strategy need to be agile?
Oh, my word.
So does the strategy need to be agile in order to stay in touch with what is being delivered on the ground through the project? And does that strategy then need to be continuously updated?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that echoes what we've said, doesn't it? I think yes is the answer.
I think yes. But I think that the key here is, I think Agile is simply too good a tool not to have in your toolbox. So whatever your role is, your ability to do it in perhaps a more agile manner than you have done in the past is worthwhile. It won't be the first choice, it won't always be the right tool, but it ought to be something that all of us as managers, all of us involved in the workings of organisations should have some knowledge about.
Now, one of the questions that has come through is something that we did touch upon briefly, but I'm going to ask the question, we can talk about it in a little bit more detail, which was, so are we looking at all the projects from the perspective of software application development projects, and how can Agile be relevant to non-software application projects?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the methods I think that you put up in your poll was one called XP, Extreme Programming. Now, I think that's very much rooted in software development. I can't see some of the ideas in XP working in other environments. So there are methods, I think, that are rooted in software development. And I think one of the aspects of software development is there is a little bit more flexibility on software. It is difficult to change code bases, but there's more ability to do it than if you built a hotel, for example, in the middle of London. You suddenly wanted to knock down half a wing and add a new one in. So certain projects, I think, lend themselves to more adaptability, whereas certain ones don't. And here, where I was saying earlier on, I think if that's the case, you might not follow an agile approach.
Well, and we actually, on the back of that question, did have another approach, another thing that follows on from it. So I'm just going to bring it in now, which is actually, can Agile be approached to infrastructure projects?
Now, the infrastructure project, I think, is a really interesting area. But before I go to infrastructure, let me go back one step, because I'm really passionate that Agile is completely appropriate for any sort of working practice. I've done a lot of work with marketing teams, with sales teams, with learning and development teams, with finance teams, all of whom can look to see Agile ideas, the ideas that are encompassed in some of the frameworks, and actually say, yeah, we can do our work that way. It gives us alternatives, it gives us a way of thinking, it gives us a way of delivery which enriches our possibilities. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to switch over to it entirely, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be the right choice, but the idea that you should understand it and be able to use it, I think is really powerful. Now, then we get to infrastructure. And if we're talking about infrastructure in an IT environment, I think we're probably at one end of a spectrum there, where are there some activities within infrastructure which we could apply agile practices? Almost certainly. At the same time, is infrastructure something that we need to have real clarity on, and the output may well need to be consistent in order to be able to integrate properly and build upon? Probably almost certainly too. So the idea, I mean, I would suspect if we talk to engineers that were specialists in infrastructure and we explained what we meant by agility, they'd have a lot of sympathy, because a lot of those engineers that are building those infrastructures are trying to do the best they can with limited resources. So they are being creative, they're being clever, they're being thoughtful. But it's also an area where clarity and good practice really matters.
Yeah, I mean, think about the project here in London, the Crossrail project, digging this tunnel underneath London, trains going along it. I mean, there's a time when we have to freeze that design, don't we? We can't, halfway through decide that we're going to change the route to go somewhere else. But we're talking about the values of agility. We can use some of the values of agility in the Crossrail project. More collaboration, for example, between cross-functional teams. We can do that. Responding positively to change. Well, maybe we could do that in the early part, but maybe not when we have to freeze the design. Less management documentation. Well, it's going to need some documentation to be clear on the quality of the products, but we don't need unnecessary documentation, maybe. So, I agree with Duncan. It's less. The change one is difficult. We need to maybe keep some consistency and some change management, and it's less easy to respond positively to change. But there are other values that we can play, even within infrastructure projects.
So, sorry, we've got all the questions coming in, so just trying to read them out, to select which ones to ask, because there's quite a few here. So, one going back to kind of the strategy subject and Prince2 and the guidance that's there. So could you argue that project managers don't need to build the business case, as that's the steering committee that owns the project?
It's a very traditional view, and it's one that's worked very well in the past. I mean, in what I would have considered perhaps a more traditional approach, it would have been quite normal at one point for the program office to have created both the project brief and the PID, and on the basis of the PID be that which is passed on to the project manager and the project team to deliver. So in an environment where you want to be very controlling of your projects, that's exactly what I think you would have seen. Now, I'm not actually arguing that that's wrong, but I'm actually arguing that it's pretty rare these days, and it's pretty rare for a simple reason. I don't think we have the resources to resource up that program level of the organisation sufficiently to be able to take all that front-end work on in the way that perhaps they once did. And actually, I think it's by default almost, it's come down a level to project management where there is the resource to actually look at that.
I think as a project team, we need to have a really strong understanding of how the products contribute to the business case. And, who writes the business case, I don't think matters too much, but it's, as a project manager, if I was running an organisation, I would want my project managers to have a really clear understanding of how the products they're delivering deliver value to the business. Because, they might come across instances where the products need to change specification or the changes come in. And when that happens, they need to have an awareness of how that would affect the business case and then the strategy. So who writes it? Well, I don't think it matters too much, but a common understanding between the higher levels and the bottom level of how there's a connection between the products and the business case, I think is important.
Okay. Staying within the theme of strategy and moving in the direction of strategic project management. So the question that I have here is, I use MSP with Lean, Agile and Prince2 in projects to achieve strategic project management. My question is, what are the key aspects to consider if we are going in the direction of strategic project management?
What's a good question? I wish I had a good answer.
You do that one first.
The first thing I'd say is congratulations. I mean, in terms of making use of the tools that are available, and I'm making an assumption there that what you're doing is you're applying them as appropriate to deliver the things that you need to get done. And I think what you've got is a good set of tools there. We've got program management, which ought to be talking to the organisation about what it's trying to achieve, ought to be making sure that we're looking at a series of initiatives, whatever they may be, that are going to deliver results that we can make use of for the betterment of the organisation. We've got project management, which is all about making sure that we're making really good use of the resources we have available, that we're delivering products that are fit for purpose, that the organisation can make use of, and that those products lead to good outcomes. Now, project management may be working through something like a waterfall, but equally these days it may be working through an agile delivery mechanism where some of that is changing day to day. It's flexible. We understand what is fixed. We understand what can flex. And I want to put a plug in here for Prince2 Agile, which actually talks extensively about trying to figure out exactly where that line is. What's fixed? What needs to be managed formally? What's flexible? What should be open to discovery and change at the lowest level? And then we're looking at lean, and to be fair, lean's a little bit of an outlier in this conversation, but nonetheless, lean is the source of a great deal of the ideas of agile thinking. Agile has indiscriminately stolen good things out of lean. And lean's whole idea of focusing on trying to reduce waste, trying to make sure that things are efficiently delivered, is simply good practice in any environment.
Yeah. I mean, I'd echo that. I'm not actually clear, and I do apologise to the questioner, what we mean by strategic project management. So I guess we'd need some sort of clarity around that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the lean ideas that have been around for sort of since the 1970s of trying to get rid of wastage is one of the things that agility tries to do, and tries to get rid of unnecessary documentation, unnecessary process, and so forth. So I think the questioner, exactly the right thing, is thinking about some of these processes through a sort of set of lean spectacles to make sure we don't do any unnecessary control within our projects.
Well, going back to the theme of Agile, one of the questions here is there such a thing as a hybrid approach between traditional and Agile? And if there is this approach where the industry is going?
Yeah, shall I do that one? I have experience of people getting into very long conversations about whether they're Agile or whether they're Scrum or whether they're Prince 2 and so forth. And I think sometimes we make the confusion to remember, you know, Agile, Prince 2 and so forth, they're a means to the end, that they're not the end itself. And I've met people who are almost sort of religious about implementing things like Scrum or Prince 2, and if you go against the methods, they think that's the wrong way of doing things. Now, from my point of view, we should use all of these as tools in our toolbox. So, you know, Prince 2 is appropriate sometimes. Some of the aspects of Prince 2 aren't appropriate sometimes. Agile is appropriate sometimes, and sometimes they're not. So I would try and think about my own environment, look at some of these approaches, pick the tools I like, which would work well, and I create a hybrid approach for my particular environment. That's how I've always seen it.
And I would say yes is the simple answer. I think that's exactly where we're going. I think there's an evangelical element within Agile which would sell us the idea that says the whole world's going to go Agile. I think there's an evangelical element out there which says, no, Agile's a bad thing. We're going to do things much more formally than that. And the truth is we're going to do both. And as a project management professional working in the field in the future, I think we need to be able to demonstrate facility at both. So the idea that Prince 2 and Agile are somehow incompatible, I think is simply wrong. We are likely to have Prince 2 trained project managers who use Agile delivery mechanisms very effectively, not reducing the effectiveness of Agile in any way. I mean, if you look at Prince 2 Agile, I think one of the cleverest things it does is it tailors Prince to create an environment where Agile can be itself. There is very little in Prince 2 Agile about the idea of Agile needs to change. It's all about how do you make Prince work so it can create an environment where Agile frameworks are successful. And that's exactly it. That's what Prince has always done. In the old days, and still today, what it does is it creates an environment where waterfall delivery mechanisms are successful. And now all we've got is extra guidance within the model which says, and by the way, guys, you can apply exactly the same principles to create an environment where Agile is successful. And Dave's point about it's not the end, it's just a facilitator. It facilitates what we're trying to achieve, and that really matters.
I think that's actually a really nice point to kind of start to wrap things up. I'm sorry to audience members that have submitted in questions that we've not actually got round to, but I'm hoping that with the range of questions we've covered off most things. I want to thank both of you for your contribution to this webinar. I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I know I've learned quite a lot, not being in a project management space myself, but I want to thank you both for your contributions.
Thank you.
No problem.
As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar, so you should receive that email tomorrow. Before we finish today, I do just want to very briefly talk to you about the AXELOS membership program. And the reason that I want to do that is that was kind of the underlying driver behind the research. So AXELOS launched a membership program towards the back end of 2015. The purpose of the membership program is to support individuals who are thinking about or who already have Prince 2 certifications that work within project management. And so the reason that we conducted the research was to have a better understanding of what the future might look like so we can support practitioners develop those skills. So we have a Prince 2 membership program that you can join. As a member, you get access to online content, resources, toolkits, a range of different online content that you can use within your day-to-day role, things that you can use to support your studies through the certifications, help you pass exams. There's also resources there to support continuing professional development. So we do encourage you to undertake CPD activities. Most of you already probably are undertaking CPD activities, but within the membership you have a opportunity to record them and then earn a digital badge that links back to your certification. We'll send you more information about the membership in the follow-up email, so I would encourage you to click on the link and find out more. And that just kind of brings us to the end of our webinar, so thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully see you on the next AXELOS webinar, which is taking place in a couple of weeks from now. Thank you. Goodbye.